Hey everyone, Richard from Digital Foundry here, and this is our first look at Destiny 2. This is PlayStation 4 footage here, and joining me to discuss the reveal is David Bearton.
Hey Rich.
Okay, so what do we got here?
Okay, so we've got the first look at the game from the Destiny reveal event, and this footage is from the Strike mission set on Nessus, which is one of the 4 sort of new locations in Destiny 2.
Okay, good stuff. And I guess the first thing that I'd like answers to is, well, fundamentally, on an engine level, how has this improved over the original Destiny?
Okay, so in terms of like the basics, we're still looking at sort of native 1080p on base PlayStation 4. This is what this particular build is running on. But from what I've noticed so far, we're looking at more of a refinement of pre-existing sort of visual effects. So, for example, the physically based sort of rendering aspects in the original Destiny weren't always that convincing. So in Destiny 2, things like sort of wet and shiny surfaces appear a bit more natural, and just the general way the lighting interacts with these elements is a bit more authentic.
Anything further? I think we were talking about GPU particles earlier.
Yeah, there's that too. One of the features of the original game was that the game had a lot of particle physics in combat, and this aspect has been ramped up in the sequel alongside other post-processing elements as well. So I've noticed there's more use of motion blur, and the depth of field appears to be using like a bokeh approach this time around.
Okay, so it looks like kind of like more refinement as opposed to a brand new engine, but I understand that there was some degree of friction in terms of creating new content on the original engine, and I suspect they've probably done more to sort that out in the sequel.
Yeah, I've been hearing quite a few things about how the content sort of creation system is a bit more sort of streamlined this time around, so it's easier to build new content for the game, new assets a lot more quickly. That was one of the main areas they struggled with the original Destiny. It was quite difficult to get new aspects of the game put in during development, and the engine changes seems to have sped that process up a bit more.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see some more content from the final game because, well, fundamentally, if we look back on Destiny 1, that game was kind of like a cross-gen release. There was Xbox 360, PlayStation 3 releases as well. So, in a sense, that engine had to kind of cater to 2 console generations. Now, Destiny 2, essentially, Xbox 360, PS3 no longer an issue. We've just got the current gen consoles to factor in here, plus of course the PC version, which we'll talk about in a bit. So yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see how that pans out. But certain things that we can tell from this early build here is, the original Destiny was a completely locked 30 frames per second on PS4 and indeed Xbox One. And how does the performance look on this one?
Basically exactly the same. It's locked 30 frames per second. I think I noticed one little frame rate drop, one single frame, but other than that it's consistent. There's no frame pacing issues or anything like that. You're getting a nice sort of smooth, stable experience even when there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of leads us onto the PC version because we don't actually have any footage of that whatsoever. They didn't release any from the event, no capture was allowed, but the PC version, well, essentially it does allow for unlocked frame rates, and I think the event showed the game running 4K 60 frames per second on a GTX 1080 Ti.
Well, that's right, yeah, and it should provide a massive improvement over the consoles just on the basis of the extra sort of fluidity provided by 60 frames per second, and of course you can take advantage of that extra sort of pixel density at 4K as well if you've got the hardware to do it.
Yeah, Wes, a Eurogamer who actually took the PS4 captures we're seeing here, he was saying that the console versions actually look quite soft, whereas the PC version at 4K was almost, I think the phrase was like hyper-real. So there was, much more detail being resolved as you would expect. 60 frames per second, of course, versus 30, anything up to like a halving of input lag there. And there's also, of course, keyboard and mouse support. So yeah, there's some interesting differences there, like no recoil on the gun when you're firing using a mouse, which Wes was saying, as a sort of hardened Destiny player using a joypad, that's actually kind of a bit of a sort of game changer almost. And much more precision control there, so that's going to be really interesting to see how that sort of pans out. But one thing which did come up was that Destiny 2 is still using a sort of fully client-based online gaming system, so no dedicated servers here.
Yeah, it seems to be like an interesting sort of oversight there, as most of the big first-person shooters, particularly on the PC side, the gamers like to have dedicated servers to ensure that sort of everything's very fairly matched with regards to sort of input lag, and it helps to reduce any sort of instances of cheating, that kind of stuff. So I guess that's one aspect that could potentially throw up a few sort of latency issues depending on your individual connection if they're doing the peer-to-peer thing.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the problem that I have with this kind of client-based system is that, essentially the code sits on your PC, and if it sits on your PC, then it's much more easily hackable than a dedicated server that's sitting somewhere in the cloud. And obviously there's this whole kind of discussion at the moment about why the PlayStation 4 Pro version isn't running at 60 frames per second. And it's interesting to note that Glenn Fiedler, who worked at Respawn Entertainment, Sony, he's a network specialist that's worked on a vast range of AAA multiplayer titles. He was saying that the physics, the AI, all of that stuff could be offloaded to the cloud, to dedicated servers, and this would free up a lot of computational resources on the clients. So, and from that respect, maybe it could have been a 60 frames per second game if they were shifting to a dedicated server model. Obviously that's not going to happen, but yeah, I am still concerned. The amount of client-based multiplayer titles on PC that have been compromised due to the lack of dedicated servers. I think The Division was a bit of a disaster. I'm really hoping we're not going to see anything along those lines with Destiny 2.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that CPU power could possibly be freed up if they went to dedicated servers, as that's one of the reasons why Destiny is running at 30 frames per second on console. So according to Bungie's Mark Noseworthy, there's a lot of extra GPU power available in PS4 Pro to enable a higher resolution than 1080p, but on the CPU side they're kind of bottlenecked. So there isn't enough of a speed bump there in order to double the frame rate in terms of computations for physics, animation, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so we got some kind of fake 60 frames per second footage here which have been running. What I did was to take our existing PS4 captures and run them through a filter that's similar to the kind of motion interpolation you get on TV, so you get a kind of much smoother image. It gives some idea of how the PC version will look, but yeah, you're right. Essentially, we're not going to get anything like this on the consoles. We know that for a fact on PS4 Pro, where they're talking about a 4K output. I think what's interesting to note there is that they're not telling us what kind of flavour of 4K we're going to get. Is it going to be something like 1800p with an upscale? Is it going to be checkerboarding? Is it actually going to be native? Kind of can't see that happening. But yeah, 30 frames per second there. There's a lot of reasons for that. Not just the CPU side, but also I think fundamentally it's a question of fairness. I mean, we are locked to 30 on base hardware. We do have some extra CPU power on Pro and indeed Project Scorpio, but not enough to make a sort of game-changing difference. I mean, the PC version at the Destiny event was using a 7700K, which is like a quantum leap compared to the console CPUs. So yeah, there is that. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what kind of 4K presentation we get. And I think we're going to be seeing something at E3 possibly for the Scorpio version, and that is interesting because if we are seeing a similar engine to Destiny 1, well, that was running at 1080p on Xbox One as well as the PlayStation 4 version. And that suggests that there will be a kind of native 4K version on Scorpio. And if there isn't, I'd be kind of disappointed because fundamentally that's what the console's been designed for, to run 900p and 1080p Xbox One engines at full 4K. So yeah, I'm kind of going to be fascinated to see the difference between Pro and Scorpio there, whether it's going to be native on both or whether there's going to be upscaling trickery, checkerboarding on either platform really. I mean, one thing we can take away from Destiny 1 is that, well, basically, apart from the content exclusives, Xbox One, PS4, those games were essentially identical.
Yeah, I imagine so they might aim for sort of parity in that regard as well, although who knows, maybe we will get a higher resolution on Xbox Scorpio compared to Pro, but I guess we'll have to wait and see to find out.
Yeah, I mean, this was the initial reveal. I guess they want to keep their powder dry for more Destiny 2 action at E3, so yeah, I'm going to be looking forward to that. But I think we're going to wrap it up here. More Destiny 2 to come, I'm sure, in the fullness of time, but in the meantime, do like and subscribe to support our work, and we'll catch you next time.